Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojó ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. It is Theoryforge Chronicles. I am Phantom X, of course, joined by our regulars, Legendary Neurotoxin, Sog, and Diggs, and we are joined by special guest, Morbis. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Yeah. We are going to be talking a little bit about exposition, so that's where, I guess, getting ready to get ready. But before we get to that, I want to give Morbis a chance to sort of kind of tell everyone who might not know you a little bit about you.
Well, I mean, what level do you want to go? Hi, my name is Morbis.
Hey,
Who are you? Where did we find you from?
Yeah,
My name is Morbis, and I host the longest running Chronicles of Elyria related podcast on the internet, technically, The Town Crier, where I, for the last year and like a half, I guess, episode 76, last episode, every week, I somehow pull random topics out of a hat and talk about them in relation to Chronicles of Elyria. Apart from last week, because this week didn't go very well. But other than that, it's been going good. So that's who I am. I'm also, I'm a big, I have a lot of money in Chronicles of Elyria. I'm very emotionally invested in COE. So I'm just a
awesome.
Why are you emotionally invested? What's exciting you about COE?
Oh, so COE is definitely one. The way I talk about Chronicles of Elyria to a lot of people is, do you remember way back in the 90s when you were playing a MUD, for those of us who are old enough to play MUDs, and you thought, I wonder what this MUD would be like in 3D and like with good graphics and a modern setting. That's kind of what I see Chronicles of Elyria as. It strikes me as a modern version of a MUD. Instead of the way that MMOs actually went, which is the EverQuest, World of Warcraft, theme park type route. So that's really what excites me about COE. COE is the latest in a long, long line of sandboxy MMOs that I've played. Like, it really is just like the one that is here now. Before that, it was Mortal Online or Darkfall or any of the other sandbox MMOs that have failed horribly in the past, because God has there been a lot of them. So yeah, that's what. It's just another attempt at a sandbox MMO from another set of developers who this time seem to be a little bit better compared to the other ones. We'll see.
So how do you feel about spending so much money, being heavily invested monetarily for a game that you can't even play yet and might not ever be able to play?
I mean, but before anyone ever says anything, I am very much aware that it is rather stupid how much money I've spent on this game. A lot of the money I've spent has come from the game itself. One of the things I do, I'm fairly sure you guys don't really monetize at all, right? It's completely unmonetized.
Right.
Whereas I milk my audience for every single penny I can. Jesus Christ. But almost all of that goes back into COE. So given that I've made about $7,000 off of the game in the last year and a half, and I haven't put, a lot of that's gone back into COE, I don't feel quite so bad. Other than that, I have low expenses. COE is the genre of gaming I want to support. These games aren't going to get made if someone isn't chucking money at them. Like, someone has to. And if I'm in a position to throw some money at them, I guess that's how I'm going to get the game I want.
Right. Yeah, that's
it does suck that I can't. It does suck that I can't touch the game yet, though. But game development takes time, a lot of time. Like, even I'm one of those people who isn't surprised that Star Citizen, for example, is where it is, because we get into these games very, very early these days, and a lot of people don't like The Witcher 3 took 7 years to develop from early phase to release, I think, something like that.
There was like a 2-year gap from the time they announced it at E3 till they showed the first artwork.
Well, exactly.
Same with Cyberpunk.
Yeah, the trouble I think we get into with a lot of these Kickstarter MMOs and the timelines is that people expect to see similar timelines as they see in other games, right? We got The Witcher 3, but we heard about The Witcher 3 when it was already years into development. Like, we wouldn't have even heard about Chronicles of Elyria by now if they were following a standard development cycle. So it sucks that I can't see the game, but I'm not worried by it at all. I'm not one of those people who's thinking, Jesus Christ, why haven't they pushed the game out? It's been 2 years. I'm like, 2 years is nothing. That's baby steps in game development.
Yeah, you're not worried about EverQuest or Revival or...
Listen, my last game was Pathfinder Online. You do not have to, like... you're preaching to the choir. I'm very much aware that these things fail. No. These games fail.
My entire time on Twitch has been like, I got started watching Twitch for a game called Dominus that never came out, and then I spent a whole bunch of time with EverQuest Next, and then with I was a little bit involved with the Revival community, not like Diggs and Neurotoxin were, and now Chronicles of Elyria and Ashes of Creation. I don't even know what I am other than a guy that follows games that are now
at the moment out. Basically, I'm just a guy who's addicted to Kickstarter, it seems.
No, that's Phantom.
I haven't done Kickstarter for a while. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to break the habit. Like, there's this other MMO called Fractured that, like, the developers contact me and they're in Kickstarter, and I looked at it and I'm like, listen, if you'd gotten me 2 years ago, I would have been down for $500, easy peasy. But these, like, I have hundreds of dollars in Star Citizen. I don't want to say a number in Chronicles of Elyria.
Thousands.
The scale in Chronicles of Elyria is large for investment. Like, I thought that because I've spent like $5,000 over 10 years in IKEA, which, is really not that much a month, right? But I did it in large chunks.
Yeah.
I thought that was like an absurd amount of money until I started hearing and like thinking about the amount of money people have put into Chronicles of Elyria is that I'm like,
what? Yeah, no, it's really. I mean, Star Citizen's the same thing, right? EVE Online's the same thing. The amount of money people are willing to financially invest into products that they're really building in their head, it's incredible. But I was the same. Like, Chronicles of Elyria is the stat. Like, I am not normally a whale. I make very little money not very little. I'm comfortable, but the only reason I'm able to put as much money into COE as I do is because I'm comfortable with my current living style and I have more on top of it from the game. So trust me, I'm one of those people who, it's kind of broken me now because I've been playing World of Warcraft recently and I'm like, well, that mount's only $25 and I literally just spent $50 on Chronicles of Elyria buying some owlbears. Like, do I really, it's broken my perspective a little bit.
I was asking because I think it's my philosophy too that I don't mind spending money supporting developers, working on creating the games and the mechanics that I want to see in an MMORPG. Because, even if this one doesn't fail, at least they will have learned something or gained some more experience. And the next time around, hopefully it's easier.
That's one of the things. Yeah, exactly. It's like a build-up. Hopefully, like, as long as we actually get contact with those systems, there's like a path of learning. Because I imagine that's what we're seeing a lot in Chronicles of Elyria from Revival, right? We talked about this in the pre-show, but people couldn't hear us. How Snipe Hunter came into the project and he had a ton of stuff that he knew might work, could work, ideas that he got off Revival, and even though. So, quick question, because you guys seem Revival people.
Yeah.
Is Revival back?
No. So Revival went under when Elphonic, I guess, realized they didn't have the resources to continue making it. So they handed the rights to it back to Soulbound Studios, who made a pen and paper game out of it, but is...
I don't think you mean Soulbound.
Excuse me, not Soulbound. Skyward Star. Not Soulbound Studios.
So it's
Skyward Star. That's right. Snipe Hunter and a couple other buddies own company. Yeah, Skyward. Yes, exactly. And now everyone's correcting me in chat too. But no. So what I was saying kind of before the show is that because there is so much in common with the two games, and Snipe being brought on in a higher end develop or a design position, not as an engineer necessarily. So he's going to be in charge of trying to help flesh out the skill system and the crafting system and a lot of that stuff. A lot of the stuff I don't know exactly that translated one for one necessarily, but there was so much.
A lot of it did.
There was so much that was just in common with the two because there was that focus on the verisimilarity rather than reality to get close to the experience of doing the thing, but not with the actual tedium. So just in the way that crafting and stuff and the skills. Kind of were already, working more or less the same way, it sounded like, between the two. When we had heard about Chronicles of Elyria, it's like, well, holy hell, it's like everything we were expecting to see with Revival, except not the dark, gritty stuff and no sex. All sex is contracts. It's like Demolition Man.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Phantom X. I actually prefer this on when topics just kind of roll out.
No. We got a little bit of a direction that we want to go here, and we were on the right track when we were talking about spending money.
I think we should make it a game, and we don't say what we're going to talk about, and see if at the end everyone can guess what we were supposed to talk about.
What the original topic was.
Well, okay, I like that idea, but either way.
What do you think was write it in an envelope and at the end of the episode, today's episode was.
that could be a fun segment at the end, but we're always running overtime, so we never get to the point we would be like, we still have time for that?
Yeah.
Well, you want organic conversation.
I want to talk a little bit about exposition today. And one of the things that's so interesting about the amount of money that you can spend on Chronicles of Elyria right now is that almost all of what you're paying for, or basically anything that you're paying for, is just about exposition, right?
It gets leveraged in exposition, certainly.
That's what I mean.
It happens in Expo.
It's about the start of the game, and it's about and needs to be used in exposition, and it's about. So there's this interesting thing of spending. Spending in the game allows you to influence what the game is
at the beginning.
At the beginning, that way, but it'll feel like. So I want to know. This is at the beginning. It might just feel like the game is like all pay to win. Like, if I haven't spent a bunch of money, I have absolutely nothing to do. Well, if you haven't spent a reasonable amount of money, you're not even in exposition, right? It's like
120, I think.
Well, yeah. Or you would have had to buy a specific entry pack, but
yeah, I think 100. I think
Bloodline is the first one that gets you into exposition, or you could have. Like, if you bought the Alpha 1
$40, I think, is what I spent initially, or something like that. Maybe up to 90.
Yeah.
I thought it was just 40
around $100 to be in exposition.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So, what do we think about that? Like, all of these resources being built up to be kind of like, and like everybody's unwrapping a bunch of presents in exposition.
Well, I was kind of hoping maybe Morbis, since he's been around for a year and a half, could maybe explain a little bit more about how exposition is working and what he's thinking to do with exposition, since he is so heavily invested. Because I don't really know how it works in detail.
So Expo is a 3-month period. I believe it's 3 months period before the game launches, which the developers have basically sold as this is the setting of the story, right? This is if this was a fantasy novel, this would be setting the stage. if you were a GM in a tabletop game, this would be, coming up with what the world looks like previously. Chat is saying 3 months, so I'm willing to say that it is 3 months. And it's broken up into 3 phases of what's available. In the first month, PvP is completely disabled. You can run around and do whatever you want. Second month, a little bit of PvP is enabled. And then third month, it's, I believe it's full contact. And so one of the questions you asked is, what do I intend to do with Expo? Yeah. I mean, what I intend to do with Expo is to use everything I've bought to put myself in as strong a competitive position as physically possible, so I can leverage that into the future to get more gains. But I'm a very competitive player.
So what does that mean? What does that look like?
Who are you competing against, and what are you competing for?
Yeah.
So the competition is between communities, right? I have my community. I want my community to be the most powerful community in the local area. I want preferably for my group to hold as many of the titles as physically possible, to be the number 1 political power, for my group to have the most political agency physically possible. It's the same you see in games like EVE Online, right?
I don't play EVE Online, so that doesn't tell me anything.
Well, in EVE Online, there is Not Space, which is basically free-for-all PvP space that players compete to control. It's territory control. And that's basically what I'm going to be using Expo for, setting up my and my group's initial position so that we can expand into the world and make sure that what we want the world to look like is the most likely end result that the world will look like. It's all about agency, right? One of the things I find interesting when we talk about pay to win in Chronicles of Elyria is that the line that we get from the developers is that, well, Chronicles of Elyria can't be pay to win because there is no set end goal, right? There's nothing that we are competing towards. It's an good, because so do I, that there is a story, and that the fact that there's no win condition means that a game can't be pay to win, rather than that it's pay to set up and pay to prop up things. Whereas I see this about being agency. As someone who has bought a lot of money, bought a lot of stuff in the game, I have a lot of agency in deciding what the world looks like at the beginning, right? That's what people are dropping money into. It's increasing their agency at deciding what the game looks like at the beginning. So I'm fully expecting Snipe Hunter, at least in chat, to disagree with my statement, because I've gone at him a couple of times with pay to win. But yeah, that's what I see X was. Did I answer your question? I kind of forgot what the initial question was.
So
go ahead.
Let's say we're taking a whole bunch of stuff into exposition and we're setting stuff down and we're building things up. My question about exposition is, you framed it nicely in a competitive way where if your goal is to, subjugate or eradicate, if that's what you want to do, hey, that's actually interesting in the game, right? So many things that other people want to do is not interesting. I want peace and love and law and order everywhere. I'm going to do everything for everyone.
To be clear,
subjugate or eradicate sounds more fun to me.
I mean, the only way you get peace and law and order is by subjugation. You have to have a monopoly on violence, right? There's a reason there's the saying, if you want peace, prepare. If you want peace, prepare for war? I can't remember what it is. But,
anyway,
that's how it happens.
That's an interesting thing. So setting yourself up for, the ability to do what you want.
You're going for a unifying China sort of peace. There's these 5 different provinces. I'm going to take them all over.
The reason that we have peace and order in modern government is because the government has a monopoly on violence over people.
That's a very Western viewpoint.
Not really.
Yes, really.
The reason it is in that collectivism. It's a very not liberal, but individualist approach to government. However, it applies to most governments, especially historic
Western governments.
No, even Eastern governments. For example, the Japanese governments of feudal Japan were very much about monopolies.
Native American, but
okay, that's fair. I saying that all governments have been about having a monopoly on violence, and I actually don't know.
Way.
Well, yeah.
Are we talking about?
That's our way. Okay, that's our way.
I just want to ask this question before we go off too much on a tangent. Are we talking about the system of organization for a large group of people, or are we talking about the apparatuses of the state and like having state infrastructure? Because I think that's a little bit of what we're talking about. Is you're talking more about developing state infrastructure and using that to manage and moderate the peace in the area. And under the rules of that, most state structures exist as like, the threat of compliance or violence.
Yeah.
So if that's what we're talking about,
the reason the worst aspects of civilization in the Western world currently and historically in the Western world have behaved themselves is because there has been a bigger grouping who are willing to smack them over the head when they act out, right? The reason we don't have anarchy in the streets is because the police will beat you over the head and chuck you in prison if you do. It's a monopoly on violence.
I don't know. That may be part of it. At the same time, we've created our own panopticons, so like people are like we created our own surveillance state, so we all end up naturally falling in line without thinking about it. But so we built our own prison, and now we get to live in it.
That's true of empathic individuals. However, there are plenty of entirely unempathic individuals, people who with varying degrees of social disorders, who don't care about the fact that they're being watched.
Or everyone in a video game.
Yeah, exactly. People behave very differently in video games as they do in real life, right? It's just the way things are. People are much more willing to act sociopathic in a video game because it's just a game, right? I'm not actually hurting anyone, technically. So what does it matter if I stab this dude in the face? So yeah.
They wouldn't have made that animation if they didn't expect me to do it.
Yeah, that's always a nice argument. I mean, it's possible, so why shouldn't I?
Well, I guess that's the rule of, well, you let me punt kittens, so I'll punt kittens.
Well, where I wanted to go with before we went on this tangent was, so, I mean, that's great if you're trying to build a strategic advantage to subjugate or control or build influence, but what if I'm just a guy, right? So I'm a guy, I want to have lots of otter bears. I don't really, because I don't like animals at all. But let's say I am a guy that wants to have a whole lot of otter bears. And I get into exposition and I'm like, I bought all this stuff. I'm gonna get my little plot and I'm gonna unwrap my otter bears, and poof, I now have all my otter bears. That's I feel like this would be terribly unsatisfying, right?
It almost
you
certainly
built up
would.
all this stuff and you have like Christmas morning, and then you're like, okay, so now I just bought everything that I wanted to be in the game, and now I am everything that I wanted to be in the game now.
So what you're talking about there is actually one of the critical problems that these kind of games run into, right? But one of the reasons that theme park MMOs are so successful is because they basically hold your hand from event to event to event to event, right? There's a very clear end. In World of Warcraft, why do I want to go to this raid? Because I get better gear, so I can go to the next raid. I want to progress. There's a clear line of progression. But in sandbox MMOs, that isn't always the case, right? There are very, very often times where you have to self-actuate. You have to be able to look at yourself and think, what do I want from this game? What do I have now? What can I do with what I have now? And what can I do moving forward? And certainly the ability to place things prior to the game's launch will, in part, impact that. The fact that I can buy 100 otter bears right now this second certainly makes it much, much less fulfilling if my goal in game was to gather 100 otter bears. But what do I do now? I have these 100 otter bears. Now my gameplay is, how do I take care of these otter bears? What can I do with these otter bears? What happens when Bob down the street comes and tries to take 50 of my otter bears? And I don't want him to do that because I love my otter bears.
Nobody is going to be trying to take your otter bears.
Listen, people want my otter bears, okay? I have a lot of them. I have had threats from other duchies saying we're going to come kill my otter bears. They want my otter bears.
I'm wondering with the otter bears.
Needs them to run his natural reserve, right? His nature park.
Yeah, I was going to say.
My otter bear preservation reserve. You guys know about that?
Is it the sort of thing where the ones that you purchase are automatically like unable to breed, or can you totally breed or have those ones reproduce? If that's the case, find an environment where they can naturally exist and thrive, and turn your 100 into thousands.
Exactly. That's the point. Well, that's what. Well, I mean, until the ecology completely collapses, because now you have 1,000 otter bears who are like top of the food chain, and oh dear, everything's gone horribly wrong.
Now you've got something to hunt. You can get some of that sweet otter bear fur.
Snipe Hunter has used RimWorld as a comparison numerous times in Discord when talking about the game, and in RimWorld it would be very likely that if you overbred otter bears, they would go berserk and
just murder everything.
They would eat all of the trees, and there would be no more lumber. and
things will go horribly wrong.
Disrupt the world, and your colony would die.
Well, hopefully that's what we see in Chronicles of Elyria, right? The way that I'm not too concerned about Expo is because I fully expect that 3 months after the game launches, that if the story engine that they say they have is as dynamic as they say they have it, then hopefully that story engine has shuffled things up so much that who cares who owned the stuff at the beginning? Half of it's at the bottom of a fiery pit now because that volcano exploded last night, you know.
But if you're the guy that buys stuff and now the exposition's over, then you can't be the guy that buys stuff.
But I guess I'm also still not understanding exactly how it works. So you dominated during Expo, so that means that there's a legend about.
You didn't necessarily dominate anything. You just.
But that's his plan. I'm saying if he succeeds in his plan, what happens?
So
what's the effect then?
I mean, so what I'm doing is essentially setting the stage for launch, right? I set myself up, or someone like me sets themselves up with EP to be the warlord, the dominator of this region, and in other games, I might be an NPC. Right? There might be this dude over the hill who is an evil badass, and he has thousands of soldiers, and as this lowly farmer in a fantasy novel, it is my mission to go and kill him. Like that's what Expo is. It is setting the stage for future stories. And to set the stage for future stories, there has to be asymmetrical balance in the starting positions of each character. And that's what buying stuff in the game lets you do. It lets you set yourself up potentially just to be content for other players, or, you know, and to murder them all.
And souls and their objectives and all of that stuff is another factor that's going to really help, like, kind of guide and direct around what's going to happen in the game. I feel like that's one of the big differences with. We talked about Ultima Online, I think it was either earlier in the show or in the pre-show, and I was kind of thinking about it. It's like, well, Ultima Online was in many ways the true sandbox, but it was a sandbox that really didn't give much objective or narrative. They would have events here and there, but it was mostly the narrative that you, the players, made for yourselves, almost like Eve, but Eve had a lot more like flavor text, and it had the built-in factionalism.
Well,
this
Eve Online
direction.
Eve Online also had the benefit of slow rolling. Eve Online built up a small community and then expanded out into what it is today, and a lot of games don't get that opportunity.
That's true.
I don't think a modern sandbox can launch. I don't think EVE Online could launch in today's market and succeed. I don't think there would be space for it. I think that the approach that SBS is taking with their story director working in the background to make things happen, I honestly think it's a necessity for the way that that sandbox MMOs have to go. Basically, you have a GM in the back who's making sure interesting things are happening, just to mess up the.
It's funny you say that. I go back to Revival, the gold server, the one that you had to pay a subscription to play on. They actually plan to have active GMs in the world affecting story and messing with stuff. So
SBS
I would love to see something like that.
SBS have always hinted that they kind of had plans to do that. I have a lot of bad experiences with game devs or game GMs, like game GMs as in not story and
like
people who can spawn stuff in. Yeah. I have a lot of experience with them going in and what language am I allowed to use on this podcast?
Whatever language you want.
Big dicking it about, just kind of swinging it all over the place because, hey, I'm empowered to do this. Mm-hmm. So I'm personally actually a little bit worried when developers say that. I'd much rather that there was an algorithm in the background doing it for them. Plus, it's so much cheaper.
One of the most notorious bad examples of this in IKEA was the god Caspian.
Well,
who was fired from the team?
Any relation? I hope not.
I just think that it's funny the random use of the same name, but that was.
So I'd still like to try and get a clearer picture, and I have two examples that I'd like to follow.
Go for it.
One is, again, the warlord, and the second one is our ubiquitous Baker, Harold Baker. So we have a warlord. In exposition, they succeed in making some kind of dominant colony, warlord, warrior kingdom. What happens at launch? What's the potential to happen then? So is this the warlord soul? Is that still around at launch?
Yeah. So there's persistence over Expo. Expo leads. I'm fairly sure there isn't a time jump between Expo and launch. I'm fairly sure it just goes Expo launch. So literally during Expo, I'm going around plopping down all of the buildings I buy. I go, I want there to be walls here. And I want there to be a castle here. And I want there to be, I bought 100 spears and they will be set here. And that's what Expo is. It's doing a lot of the world building that otherwise developers would be doing, but player driven. It's essentially crowdsourcing launch state, right? That's what it is. It's it's granting the players, and again, the word agency, the agency to set the stage for all of the players, the masses of players who will hopefully come into the game on launch. So when the game launches, you have this small core of players who have been in since Expo, who have set the stage, and then you have the masses who come into it. And from their perspective, it's really no different than any other game, right? When you go into, if I went into EVE Online today, there are these massive empires that already exist. There are these massive power blocks, political blocks that already exist. And I can go into that game and build my name up. But that's basically what the game will look like on launch for COE.
Like you said with EVE, that kind of evolved over time, and it took a decade for all of that to kind of solidify. So Expo ends and the game opens up in Chronicles of Elyria, and you've set your castles where you want. You have your dukes and your counts in the places that you want. And then a whole bunch of people come in and you're like, do this. And they go,
and they're going to go, no.
So you're a duke?
Why,
can you just say that you're that duke again?
Yeah. Well, that's what I think anyone who is intelligent about playing Chronicles of Elyria from purchasing a title perspective is very much aware of that, right? I have told my people multiple times that the first year of the game, of the literal game, not in-game time, the first game year is going to be spent going around the duchy, making sure that people are towing the line. That's what I mean when I say enforcing stuff, right? What are you giggling at? Are you giggling at
the sheriff of Nottingham? That's
basically. Well, people follow in a lot of in games. The only reason you'll generally get large groups to follow you is by being the biggest boy on the field. That's what the first year of gameplay is going to be. Chronicles of Elyria will launch, and it's going to be a complete clusterfuck of people not caring about all these preset rules that people have gotten up about. Their communities won't care. You're going to have to haul them kicking and screaming to your way of things if you want to be dominant. And the ease with which groups
then if you try to do that, it's not going to work.
Well, that depends on how much mechanical power these pre-built titles have. If as a Duke I have dominant control over the NPCs that live in my territory militarily, then it might be very easy. If I don't, then yes, it will be very, very difficult. And what we'll see very quickly is a balkanization of territory, right? The kingdoms will collapse. They will collapse into these tiny petty kingdoms that will be counties big. And then over time, we will see those groups come back together and reform. I'm not sure which we will actually end up with, right? I'm not sure if we will go into the game and the preset boundaries will stick around, or if we're going to get into the game and everything's going to completely collapse, like entirely. I'm honestly not sure which one's going to happen.
So this sort of gets into what Diggs and I actually were talking about with exposition. I think what led to even considering this sort of as a topic was the story. You mentioned EVE Online. I played it. It's not for me. I don't like it. However, over the last several years...
Don't worry, it's not for me either.
The last several years, PC Gamer has had some incredible stories written up about the things that happened in that world.
That's the best, just quickly, that's the best way to play EVE Online, by the way. It's not to actually play the game, it's to read the stories that come out of EVE Online.
And so I've been looking for, for a while, I would love to have that in some sort of either low, mid, high fantasy setting, something outside of a sci-fi setting.
Yeah, an avatar-based fantasy game.
Yeah, and Elyria certainly has the possibility to do that. But part of what we were talking about was this idea of building a story and exposition. I've been playing at Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for a while, and they're actually doing a prequel coming out in November, and that's sort of what sparked this, was this idea of in the game you're introduced to, you hear about all this backstory, and now you're getting to go back and play it, but that sort of triggered this conversation about exposition. And the two questions that sort of come up in my mind with that, at the 3-month period where everyone is going to be focused on building, is that really going to be enough? You mentioned EVE took 10 years to build up some of these stories. Is that really, as far as a player-driven story, not just the system or what the devs put in, but is that really enough time? So when you get to that last month and you have PvP, are people actually going to start creating stories? So that's number one. Number two, when you finally get through exposition, as you just mentioned, people aren't going to care who you are. So does it even really matter, at least for that first 6 months, what happened? Is it now maybe 2 years from now when things have settled down and everybody's kind of in a consistent place, then you can go back and talk. But that's actually the idea of the story. I mean, that's kind of what Diggs and I were talking about that sparked this.
So on the first part, the stories that you see come out of games like EVE Online and the big sandbox games, they come out because there is an inherent drama in conflict, right? So personally, let me put it this way. Do I think we're going to get PC Gamer articles about the first couple of months of Chronicles of Elyria? No, certainly not. We might get like an article like man who spent $40,000 on in-game kingdom loses it in first day. That certainly might be a story that we get out of Chronicles of Elyria very, very quickly. But I don't think we'll see the high drama of EVE Online straight away. I don't think it's realistic to think that. But
I use Akia as my frame of reference because it's the game that I've played the most of any game ever. And if you play Akia and you start a character and you're, joining a group and they're going to have you read history that is in the game, that it was written by players about events that happened in the game.
Yeah.
years ago. And at the very beginning of the game, there was this like totally chaotic period, and the people whose names kind of carried forward after that were literally just the most violent and the most successful at killing and disrupting everything and taking whatever they could at that time.
In times of chaos, the big names are warlords. Like, that's how it is. The powers that come out of chaos tend to be those with the biggest stick. But, sorry, I interrupted.
And so eventually, the question is, how does the transition go, though? So we go from, now we're just kind of placing stuff, to, it's expo time. And then Snipe said he thinks there is a gap between that and launch, like a time fast forward of a little bit of time. So the question is, well, what can we actually do that's meaningful to another player? Like, if I'm just starting the game on day one, what exposition did is, maybe set the scene a little bit, maybe what I see is the result of that. But am I going to care that something happened in exposition? I don't think so. I think that the story part, the player generated story, is really going to be what happens after that. Like,
from what Morbis said about what he hopes to do, I think what we see coming from that, if he's actually laying down castles instead of having to start building the castle at launch from scratch, like he's bought a castle so he can just plop the castle down, then that gives people a reason, if they like living in a castle or hope to live in a castle or a fortress, or if we're going to be in a cavalry centric kingdom, people might flock to that because that's what's been built. I'm still wondering, or Phantom wants a farm. I guess that means he can start building his farm during Expo, and start planting whatever goods he wants to, or crops he wants to plant during that time. And then I'm wondering, hopefully Harold Baker will be able to jot down a bakery and start baking a bunch of eclairs and have tons of eclairs to sell.
Well, hopefully that's kind of what it is. It's civilization requires a lot of foundational things to actually happen, right? Economies need a certain flow to actually work. And I think part of the reason Expo is important is because it sets all that prior to launch. It lets people get into the world. It lets people, I know I say set the stage a lot, but it's a good turn of phrase for this, making sure that the world is ready for these masses of people to come in and break everything. So it's not, to be clear, like my whole build up the defenses and the aggressive nature of my domain, that's primarily because I'm a duke. That's my job in game, given what the in-game titles are supposed to do. If I was just a random person, my Expo experience might literally be, I really like owlbears because I think they're cool. I bought 5 owlbears. I'm going to walk into the wilderness, buy some land, and start my little owlbear farm.
Well, I think there's still a difference. I think even a duke, like, I forget which one was it. It was Polite who was saying that he's going to have the nature preserve, right? So instead
is he stealing my ideas?
Instead of dominating, he might be, using the owlbears to start his nature preserve, which is,
to be clear, to dominate someone, you don't necessarily need to do so militarily.
You
Cultural
use
domination.
The words dominate and subjugate. You can't.
You can't.
You talk about how big your stick is.
Yeah,
social power, soft power is still a stick. But yeah, I get what you mean. A lot of the time, I think it will mostly be military subjugation. But that doesn't mean I'm not interested in the cultural aspects of the game.
I'm just saying it's a very Western perspective.
Technically,
I like that Morbis has the division to say, like, you know what, I am gonna just be keeping.
Yeah,
I am gonna whip people.
That's
Yeah,
I honestly believe
kumbaya.
it's not going to work. Well, I mean, I think we can all agree, right? If a PvP group from a different game, like say there is a Twitch streamer who comes into your domain and he has 150 of his friends, which is a small group for a decent sized Twitch streamer, and he goes, well, why should I follow you?
Go Carnage back to this game.
I'm fairly sure he did, yeah.
So we're not talking 100 people.
No, we're talking thousands.
5,000 or 6,000 people showing up. But
so, you know, how there's no way you're going to kumbaya your way into not being subjugated by that group, right? They are going to end up on top. So, you know, sooner or later you're going to have to defend what you want.
You could just ignore that if you're a baker. Right?
Yeah, well, exactly. If you're a baker, what does it matter? Why do you care who your count is if you're a baker? You might care who your mayor is because he's the dude who's deciding your taxes.
They can help set up the crops and protect my crops and protect the...
Well, there is...
If you see that, I don't know what you'll see or what you won't.
I mean, you want a good count, but as long as the count is good, do you care who it is what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, do you care who the name is?
Because I don't want to be subjugated.
That's why I said good count.
But I'm envisioning. I'm not thinking of Morbis in like super Western. Well, I guess it's like kind of central, but like I see Morbis as Ramses, and I think that the first story coming out of Morbis's area is going to be like the Moses of his
set my people. No.
Yeah, he's gonna set my people free, Morbis.
The way that you win territory control in these kind of games is by making sure that if someone goes up against you, they don't stand a chance. And any duke who is not approaching the game that way is going to lose a lot of their influence, a lot of their power, and a lot of their land very, 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 very quickly.
So you're pro gun control.
No, in fact, one of the primary motivations for joining one of the things I've said in my duchy is I want every single person to be trained with a military weapon. Yeah, I think I honestly
I want the I want to hear the story about the Moses of your duchy that sets the people free.
I mean,
or they all migrate away.
Because that's but that's what I love about hearing, because I keep saying it every show. I keep hearing the lawful order. I'm going to do this, and certainly my approach, because I'm chaotic good, I would be in there being Robin Hood or being Moses, and being chaotic good, going against
lawful good empires. In fantasy books, in a fantasy book, I would be a lawful good leader, probably.
I know, and I'm saying, and I laugh because I'm chaotic good, and I'd be fucking your shit up. That's why I laugh, because that's just absurd to me. It's it's not the polar opposite, but because I'm chaotic good, it amuses me when I hear lawful good people talking about how they're going to run their kingdoms. It's just.
And I'm probably more chaotic neutral in that I just think it's funny to mess with it.
It is.
I want my settlement to just ignore the count and the duke. If they come, just pretend they're not there. Because I think it's hilarious that people with titles flaunting titles, right?
Yep.
Well, I mean, you can pretend we're not there, but when I've got 500 swords behind me and you've got 2, and I've got trebuchets and shit, like, good luck.
And
I don't know why you think Robin Hood didn't only have 2 merry men.
Kill us all. Because that's funny.
Yeah.
I have to say, this is exactly what I'm excited about, is this sort of, we've known each other 3+ years, and we still have arguments about all this, and all of the forum arguments about all this. I just can't wait till the doors are open and just see what
gonna be
happens.
fun.
everyone more or less gets along now. There's different factions and different groups and different kingdoms, and for the most part we all get along. I just can't wait to see that first moment the PvP switch is turned on. Okay, let's see what happens. Who goes after who first?
It's going to be a clusterfuck. It's going to be a ridiculous clusterfuck. Every single person in the game is going to have to prove to other people that they can own what they own. Because there will be someone who is going to come along and try and take what you own. And if you want to own stuff,
but you don't have to prove anything. You just fuck them up by not participating in the way they expect.
Yeah.
Well, then you won't have the stuff.
I don't care about the stuff.
Cool. But if that's your gameplay, then that's fine.
I'll just take yours. I don't have to keep it.
That's proving that you. That is a part of that is proving that you can have what you hold.
I don't care about having holding what I have. I just have to fuck your shit up. That's what I'm saying. It's chaos.
Yeah, that's fine.
But on the other end, he's having to protect what he has. I mean, that's his point. That's your point, right? I mean, he's proving your point because you're going to have to protect what you have.
Yeah, if you come at my stuff, I have to prove that I want to hold this stuff. I have to defend it from you.
Otherwise, you're just throwing it at each other.
You're taking this stuff. It's not me, right? I'm fucking with because I'm Robin Hood. I'm not coming at you because you have stuff. I'm coming at you because you're an oppressive tyrant.
Yeah.
Right? I oppose that.
Yeah, and that's part of the story. That's part of the fun.
He's doing it all just to impress Marion.
That's right.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay,
but wait. So Harold Baker, he's not a count, but he still might have stuff that he wants to achieve, and he still might have EP to try and do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this kind of stuff that he would be hoping to get are things to put into a bakery, and those would be available through EP.
Yeah, you can buy things like buildings and like crafting stations and stuff like that, and land and things like that. Certainly, it isn't. The exposition isn't a chance for those of us who bought huge amounts of EP to dominate the world. It's very much if all you want to do is own a farm off of a place, you buy a barn, you buy some animals, you buy some land. You go out, you stake your claim, and you build it up. That's certainly something that can happen in Expo. In fact, it's a very important part of Expo.
And then you're bored, and your OPC plays for you while you're
if the entirety of your goal in the game was to own a farm, then yes, that's the end of your story. And now you have to self-actuate, and you need to find what you want to do in the world to move forward.
I think that is a big risk with the exposition thing and how people are able to buy like the things that they need to do what they want in the game at that point. That if you get into the game and in exposition you set it all up and then you're at this point where you're like, oh man,
well, I just
set myself up to my whole game is take care of owlbears.
Why else would you want to farm?
Forget those owlbears. I guess I just blew my money on dropping owlbears in the world. I'm gonna go rent a raft and go down street. Yeah,
if that's what you want to do with the game, then go ahead. Like that's part of an open story game. You self-actuate, you find the things you want to do, and you go out and make it happen.
I'll be fine just farming. I don't anticipate getting bored.
That's the spirit.
But you're a count.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, counts can own a farm.
Yeah.
I intend to own a vinery.
He's going to dominate his farm. That's what you're telling us.
Well,
I mean, you're going to have to
grow.
Yeah. Or you're going to have to subscribe to some form of community that is able to defend that territory if you want to own that farm from the rampaging hordes of chaotic bastards who want to burn everything down.
The concept of defending territory is so interesting to me because, like, until the war gets to your doorstep, like so few people care other than people that just want to fight, right? So what percentage of the people are just going to want to fight? What percent? What will there really be people just farming, or will it turn into people just fighting? We don't know yet.
I mean, we have historical bases. We have games in the past that have followed similar. When I say historical, I don't mean historical. I mean other games, to be clear. We have other games that have had similar cases where you very much have industrialists who are very much invested in the outcomes of wars. Because as any modern economist knows, what drives economies is markets. And when there's a war happening next door, your market is being destroyed and you now make less money. You saying that, unless the war is on your doorstep, you have no real reason to care about it. That is at the lowest level, that is true.
Don't we have to mint our money? Are people going to care about that?
Yeah, we'll see. Currency.
That's just not going to happen.
No, I agree. I think there needs to be a backed currency. That's an entirely different conversation. But anywhere that there is money to be made in game, there will be a massive amount of investment.
But that's part of what I'm saying. So this is this concept of money going with the economy as a Western concept that may not be in play, since we have to mint our own money, and we don't know that the players are going to be interested in doing that. So it might be a barter economy versus a
quite possibly. In fact, I've had this argument, but I personally think that it's rather likely that we might start with a barter economy. However, most modern economists would agree that as the complexity of an economy increases, the necessity for a common currency also increases. That isn't an opinion. Well, it is an opinion, but it's a fairly academic opinion.
In games without currencies, generally the community starts using a different item in the game as a currency.
Exactly. A currency will arise.
The currency could the general universal trade item could be owlbears, or it could be head of cattle,
Well, in Diablo 2, the standard unit of currency was literally a ring that happened to drop occasionally, fairly rarely, the Stone of Jordan. Yeah. SOJs became the standard that backed the rest of the economy.
Well, part of that was that the pile of gold, the 5,000 gold, took up one slot of your inventory versus the SOJ was, a considerably higher amount. So they just by proxy had to do that because they basically had to create their own hyperinflation with the SOJ because the bulk of that money, there was no way to really mitigate it. And that's kind of dumb. It's like, well, they could have just made vaults or whatever and let people put their gold in them. But
yeah, or they could have had the interesting, the interesting development of it happening through player action, which is much more interesting, right? Because nobody cares about a game that introduces vaults, but I'm still able to remember that Stones of Jordan were a currency item in Diablo 2. It's more interesting.
In a lot of cash shop games, often there's an item in the cash shop that starts to become the general currency as well. If trading of items in cash shops are available, but we're not part of general topic that we've gone well around is what we can buy, and once the game launches there will be no in-game cash shop. So I'm trying to think in terms of currency that we'll probably have to talk about a whole different episode since we're running over, but there couldn't be a cash shop item that takes that spot.
No. So what happens instead is currency is an abstraction of time, right? So sooner or later, players will find a unit that they can invest a set amount of time into and work that out. So, it will happen sooner or later. That's why in Path of Exile, there's a reason that some currencies are worth a lot more than others, and it's because the drop rate and hence the time taken to get that item is much larger. The same will happen in any game. Players will find something that drops rarely. They'll calculate how much time it takes to get that item. There'll be an arbitrary application of currency to that, and then it will work out. This is just it's the complexity of economies building up over time.
It could go so many different ways. For all we know, it's going to end up being that like a standard conventional potion of healing that almost anybody can learn how to craft and get the materials for becomes the unit of currency, because that's the one functional thing everybody can. Yeah, exactly. And I think it might end up being something like that. One more thing I want to say about currency before we talk about the shield, and I think the axe too, if we're going to, the thing, if we're going to talk about those, is with the exposition. Snipey did say that there are like a couple of years gap or whatever between the end of exposition and the beginning of gameplay. So I would imagine anybody who actually has a currency set up and minted before the end of exposition, that's a currency you're going to expect to see in that server on day one. So it almost seems like if you want to have Dominion, it's going to be the race to get your coin minted, get your money minted, and then try to get the reach of that minting as far as possible, so you'll have that far influence when things start.
Yeah.
So that
certainly having the how everything, basically the US dollar backs most modern currency, you want to try and position yourself in the same way, because that gives you a huge amount of political and economic power, certainly. I think the world is too big for that to happen realistically, but we'll see.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of items. We didn't talk about the axe last time, the Brodvir Great Axe. And our initial reactions when we were talking about it after the show, it's this big heavy thing with a wedge on it. It's not really, cutty like an axe. The length of it and the weight, because it almost looks like it's weighted closer to like a hammer with a blade on it, you're not going to be able to do a lot of the cool things you can do with an axe. Like I know Omba and Chad has talked about the application of when he does heavy fighting with SEA stuff, using an axe to hook a shield, either so that you can then deliver a blow, or that you can keep that shield down so your buddy next to you can deliver a blow. You can't really do that with that axe. That thing's way too heavy. And if you're using it two-handed, you don't really have the same protection as someone holding a line with a shield and axe.
But it's Game of Thrones, so you can do it.
That's
Game
not
of
what
Thrones.
Vi said. She said
Yes,
that
yes, it is. What
It's a great axe.
it's so what they don't care about. Okay,
Physics?
The way I have yes, in part physics, because they were much more interested
it's Game
in
of Thrones. It doesn't matter. It's gonna work.
Yeah, but you say that derogatorily as if it's a bad thing.
I'm saying that's what she said. He's saying it doesn't work in the real world, and I'm saying the response to that is it's Game of Thrones. It works, and it's gonna work, and then you just take it that it works because it's not the real world.
Because it's cool. That's the answer. Now, I personally think the axe looks a bit silly. However, rule of cool is very much a thing in video games. I'd much rather feel like something was functional than it actually, than if I made something and it would actually be functional. This is why people are drawn to certain art styles, like the big bulky shoulders in World of Warcraft.
Right, but
I'm aware some people really hate that shit.
But World of Warcraft is high fantasy rather than fantasy.
Technically, if we're going to use the literature meanings of those words, not quite. However, we'll ignore that because that's a semantic argument. I understand what you're saying.
I would say there's a couple other things that we had talked about that are just constructional mishaps with it. There's no counterbalance on the end, so it's going to be really hard to control. Just in general, something of that length. And for how heavy the head is on that, I would be worried that the head's going to come right off if you thrust with it.
That was my problem with it. The haft looks really fragile.
Yeah, even if it's a nice firewood or fire hardened wood, that's still like you block it just below the haft with the shield. Sure, the blade might go off and hit you in the head. That's no good for you. But then they're left without a weapon because it just broke off on your shield.
If you can animate it and it can collide with the hitbox and it can do what the game says it's going to do, it works. That is what we got. That was the message today. Right? The message. I agree that axe is ugly. It doesn't make sense even as an axe. It it is not something that I would ever conceive of in my own mind. Actually, I really, really, really dislike it. But we were told today that any kind of form following function argument is not valid, and we just have to take it. So I'm okay with just taking it. And I can say, I don't want that axe. It's ugly. That's fine. But apart from that, I don't know. We were actually given an answer. So instead of keeping going on this argument of whether it should be form follows function or it should be let's make things pretty, we were given an answer, and we have to take it. I'm okay with that. I just don't have to like it, because my preference, which I just have to take the way things are, but my preference would be is if it's not form follows function, that it is totally absurd, because I like both. I like the extremes.
You like the extremes of both?
Yeah, I like WoW shoulder pads. I don't think for a second that they're useful for anything.
No, they just look silly and badass.
I like WoW shoulder pads. That's fine. I've even come around on the Ashes of Creation Stufferton mount because it's absurd, and I can live with that. But so we know that we just have to take it as just about looking cool or just about adding flavor to whatever the animations are. Now, but this Kipik shield thing actually does seem kind of cool.
Yeah, it's badass.
It gives me kind of the sense that they're almost Da Vinci-esque with their kind of manufacturing a little bit. Now, it looks like wood grain on those, and so I imagine they're not really trying to sustain a perpendicular shot with it, but I would imagine with the fold-out action to it and the way it's got that kind of radial sweep, that it's instead you're trying to actively kind of parry things away with the outer edge of it, potentially even doing kind of a radial motion. It might even be able to actually kind of grab a blade in between the little slats there and allow you to potentially dislodge it like what the hell is that shield?
A lightweight projectile deflector. So
yeah, I could see that too.
There's no handle, so it's more like
the handle
is shield. So
the wrist guard.
Yeah, they have straps. They have wrist guards and the finger
But it's more like you would see a cavalry shield, so like for a horseman, because they were designed so they would strap onto the arm and be here, so they could still have both hands free. So it has that kind of use, so that you can still be mobile, you can still be doing a lot of things, but you have and the way that it's lightweight, so it's not going to get in your way, but it can take up a lot of area momentarily for things like blocking projectiles. I think it does seem pretty cool.
So, but I don't understand how it functions in the game. Does it fan out?
Yeah, you pull the finger mechanism and it fans out radially.
But you're not wearing a power glove.
I understand that. I don't understand how it works in the game.
Whether they walk around with it deployed when they're in combat and then out of combat they undeploy it just aesthetically.
Yeah, I mean, in game it's probably just going to be you go into combat stance and it deploys, I imagine.
I'm not like a quick time event where if you want to block something, you have to real quick put it up.
Well, I mean, that's probably how it's going to work in the combat system. Yes, there's active blocking, but
I'm gonna say also not to get too nitpicky about handedness, but that is on a right hand being often considered the dominant hand. I'm wondering if that's actually meant to be a lighter shield to protect your weapon hand, and they would have a different, larger shield if they're actually trying to hold the line or something. Or, if it would actually be a weapon and a shield at the same time. It would almost be like a war fan, kind of, when you're fighting like that.
That would be badass if it had bladed edges.
So my only thing to add here, because I've already put in chat that personally things are going to look how they look, but what I'm getting out of the forums, my
They do kind of look a little bladed.
my only feedback here is when something I've observed in the forums is when someone puts out an idea and you don't think it's correct, and you take the time to post that it's not correct, and then explain why you or the developers are correct, and then follow that with saying there's not enough information to speculate anyways, you kind of look like a fool. So I just wanted to say that kind of drives me a little crazy on the forums when you're arguing a point and then you end it with, we don't have any information anyways. Okay, well, why are you arguing with me? Anyways, that's my only thought here. Continue on.
Did anyone
Or
actually
don't.
do that with the Kipik shield? Like, was that on the Kipik shield one?
Spirited
It
arguments.
happens.
It's a general.
It
happens.
that
No,
I'm all for
doesn't
discussion.
exist
I
yet.
think there should be discussion. Yes, that's the whole point of having a forum. That's the whole point of doing all this is that there's discussion. But when you sort of get into a heated argument and you explain a point and then you end your thoughts with, "Well, we can't really speculate anyways," that's to me just sort of like, "Well, what are you doing here in the first place?"
Yeah, like, okay, why are you arguing it at all?
Yes. So,
Yeah.
anyways, we are a good 15 minutes over. So, does anyone have anything else left to kind of talk about, go over?
No, I've said what I got to say.
I'm good.
Who do we have next?
We're uncertain because we have not yet heard back.
Oh, Rowena is who we were planning to have, right?
Oh, Rowena is a very good guest. You will enjoy him.
Yes. And if you didn't catch that, Sog was trying to not mention the name that you just mentioned.
Ooh, tap tap.
Well, he'll either be here or not.
I'm mention, we are hoping to have Rowena as the guest, but I think I heard back today that it's there's a communication barrier since we're working through his proxy.
Has Immaculate been doing your job as well? He does that with me. He like brings me people and goes, "Do you want to speak to this dude?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'll speak to that person." He's fantastic.
So we are currently dealing with Rowena's agent, who is having difficulty contacting him.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Rowena is a very, very busy person. So.
I will say, if anyone that watches us that has fun doing this, we're totally open to anyone really coming to join us if you want to talk about anything. So just hit us up anywhere, Twitter here. Let us know. I will say next week is when we would normally do our Ashes show. I don't know if anyone here watches that. We will not be here next week, so we will be back in 2 weeks with Theoryforge Chronicles. So, all right, guys, thanks for a wonderful show. Everyone have a great weekend.
Bye.
Yeah.
I wave.